Although we have read many descriptions and seen countless depictions of the Battle of Chibi through books and films, do we truly understand this battle? In the books, there are episodes widely celebrated, such as the Banquet of Scholars, borrowing arrows with straw boats, the Ruse of Injury, and borrowing the East Wind. Yet in fact, most of these were embellishments and fabrications added by Luo Guanzong as a novelist, woven together to make the story more captivating. Some may say, in that case, we should read the records of the Three Kingdoms, or the Book of the Later Han, or the Comprehensive Mirror to Aid in Government. Wouldn't that suffice? But if we truly compare these historical records, we instead find that the truth of the Battle of Chibi becomes even more difficult to discern, for the histories are filled with contradictions. Wei, Shu, and Wu each had their own accounts, contradicting one another, forming what could be called the Rashomon version of the Three Kingdoms. Today, let us attempt to unravel this tangled version of Chibi. In the 13th year of Jianan, that is 208, Sun Quan received a special invitation letter. In the letter, Cao Cao asked Sun Quan to go hunting together, yet he brought with him a massive army, numbering close to 800,000, and the signature at the bottom was none other than Cao Cao. For Sun Quan, only 26 years old at the time, this letter was without doubt a tremendous shock. At that time, Cao Cao was campaigning south, easily taking Jingzhou with momentum to swallow the realm whole, like the midday sun at its height. Sun Quan had no doubt that by the next day Cao Cao's army might directly press against his doorstep. At that moment, before Sun Quan stood the great army of Cao Cao, behind him was the Jiangdong legacy left by his father and brother. The question of survival or annihilation was laid before him, to surrender or to resist. And the man who was at that time even more anxious than Sun Quan was Liu Bei. After surrendering to Cao Cao, Liu Bei led a handful of soldiers and a small group of civilians in a desperate escape, nearly brought to ruin. Along the way, Liu Bei several times fell into life-threatening peril, almost losing his life under the blades of Cao's troops. With great difficulty, he finally reached Jiangshi and joined forces with Liu Qi. Yet in his hands he held only about 20,000 soldiers. With such a meager force to resist the pursuit of Cao's massive army was like eggs striking stones without any chance of victory. With Cao's army pressing hard from behind and no road left ahead, Liu Bei fell into a desperate predicament. At the same time, Sun Quan was wrestling with a similar dilemma. Just as both Sun Quan and Liu Bei were at their wits' end due to the dire situation, at their sides each had an extraordinary strategist step forth. They were Zhuge Liang and Lu Su. Both, without prior agreement, proposed the same strategy to their lords, a Sun-Liu alliance. However, relying solely on an alliance with Liu Bei was still not enough to set Sun Quan's mind at ease. What truly gave Sun Quan the courage to go to war with Cao Cao was the theory of four perils put forth by Zhou Yu. Zhou Yu asserted with certainty that Cao Cao would be defeated in this battle. Why was he so confident? First, Cao Cao had only recently taken control of the north. The hearts of the people were not yet stabilized, the situation not yet firm, and in the rear, Han Sui and Ma Chao continued to stir up trouble. The threat at his back was unresolved. Second, Cao's troops excelled at mounted archery but were unaccustomed to naval warfare. Now, initiating battle on the river, they would have to abandon their horses for boats. This was clearly using their weakness to strike at the enemy's strength. Third, winter was approaching. Even the elite cavalry of Cao's forces would face food shortages and supply of provisions would be difficult to secure. Fourth, northern soldiers campaigning in the south would inevitably suffer from the differences in climate and water, leading to disease, and the burden of epidemic prevention would be immense. These 4 points were all grave taboos in the art of war and predetermined Cao Cao's defeat in this campaign. The theory of four perils of Zhou Yu did indeed provide Sun Quan with a stabilizing reassurance, but it was still not enough to completely dispel his worries. For Zhou Yu's analysis did not touch upon the most crucial issue, the disparity in troop numbers. Even combined, the Sun Liu alliance had at most 50,000 troops. How could they contend against the 800,000 men that Cao Cao claimed to command? Zhou Yu merely smiled and said, "Do you truly believe Cao Cao has 800,000 soldiers? Do not be so naive. That number was at least tripled or quadrupled. In reality, Cao's forces should have numbered around 240,000 to 250,000. This was the first point of contradiction in the records of the Battle of Chibi. Exactly how many troops did Cao Cao have? Let us not fear and examine the differing accounts. In the Jiang Biao Zhuan, it cites a letter from Cao Cao to Sun Quan, in which he wrote, "Now I command a navy of 800,000 to join with the general in aligning against Wu." Clearly, Cao Cao wrote this letter with the intention to intimidate. Exaggerating one's military strength was a common tactic, so the figure here cannot be fully believed. In the records of the Three Kingdoms, biography of Zhuge Liang, it is mentioned that after the north was pacified, Cao led 300,000 troops into Jingzhou. But in context, this was nothing more than a retrospective glorification of Eastern Wu's history, meant to showcase their achievements. Exaggerating the enemy's strength was also a common literary device, and thus this figure too cannot be deemed reliable. According to the records in Lingling Xianshen Zhuan, it was mentioned regarding bear hides, 10,000 without exception, carrying out orders to punish crimes who would dare not submit. In the Haoanji, it was also recorded that after Cao Cao seized the 100,000 navy troops of Jingzhou, he immediately went downstream to launch his eastern campaign, at which time there was no garrison to stop him. Combining these two accounts, the real situation becomes clear. That is, Cao Cao brought with him from the north 100,000 infantry and cavalry, and then absorbed an additional 100,000 navy troops from Jingzhou, totaling 200,000. After careful analysis, Zhou Yu pointed out that the forces Cao Cao actually brought from the north were about 150,000 to 160,000, while the navy of Jingzhou he incorporated numbered around 70,000 to 80,000, which together amounted to roughly 240,000 to 250,000. Zhou Yu's analysis was likely the closest to the truth. First, Zhou Yu had spent many years campaigning in the Jingzhou region and had a clear understanding of the actual situation of the navy there. Second, before the battle, when presenting his strategies to his lord Sun Quan, he naturally had to speak with certainty and accuracy without any carelessness. Therefore, it can be seen that the actual forces of both sides in this battle were approximately 50,000 for the Sun Liu coalition, opposing about 240,000 to 250,000 under Cao Cao. Although the gap in numbers was still large, compared to Cao Cao's own boast of 800,000 or even 1,000,000 troops, it was clearly not as overwhelming. In short, after Zhou Yu's thorough analysis before the battle, the Sun Liu coalition became more confident, building a firm belief that Cao Cao would certainly be defeated and that they would surely be victorious. On the other hand, within Cao Cao's camp, he himself was brimming with confidence, believing the advantage firmly in his hands. Yet his strategists under him were filled with unease. Jie Shu tactfully tried to dissuade him, saying that although they had won consecutive victories in recent years, the army was in reality already at the end of a strong crossbow, and that the capture of Jingzhou had been beyond expectations. Now, if they continued to press for another battle, there was a strong chance of a great defeat. Jie Shu's meaning was clear. He was urging Cao Cao to stop at the right time and not act rashly, because the mentality of a gambler rarely leads to good results. In other words, right from the beginning of the Battle of Chibi, the strategists of all three sides already understood that Cao Cao was likely to fail. In this battle, the only person who truly believed that Cao Cao could win was probably Cao Cao himself. Then how exactly did Cao Cao lose? The first reaction of most people would be that it was because the Sun Liu coalition used fire to burn the camp, forcing Cao's army to flee. Could there really be anything debatable about this? In fact, there was. Although the Great Fire at Chibi was confirmed in historical sources by all three states of Wei, Shu, and Wu, The contradiction lay in the question of when exactly the fire was set and by whom. For this decisive achievement that determined the outcome, both the Sun family and the Liu family wanted to claim it as their own. The Sun side said that it was Zhou together with Huang Gai who cleverly used the ruse of surrender combined with fire attack that succeeded in burning Cao's army. The Liu side argued that it was clearly after the two coalition forces first combined their strength to repel Cao's troops that they then took advantage of the situation to use fire to burn Cao Cao's warships. The strange thing is that both of these completely contradictory accounts originated from San Guoji by Chen Shou. So which version should one believe? Logically speaking, since the Sun-Liu coalition was weaker in numbers, it is more reasonable that they would seize the opportunity to use fire to burn Cao Cao's fleet and thereby deliver a decisive blow. After resolving the doubt of when the fire attack was launched, the next question is, by whom was it set? This is also the dividing line between those who love the novel and those who follow orthodox historical research. In Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Luo Guanzhong bestowed countless glorious moments upon Zhuge Liang, from borrowing arrows with straw boats to deciding the world in the palm of his hand, especially the miraculous Kongming borrowing the east wind. These episodes caused the majority of readers to gradually forget that in the official history, the true commander of the fire attack at Chibi was actually Zhou. The impression that Zhuge Liang mastered the heavens above and the earth below largely came from the fictional episode of Kongming borrowing the east wind. But unfortunately, there is no record of this at all in the official histories. Everyone knows that the fire attack strategy of the Sun-Liu coalition had an obvious flaw. It was the middle of winter, the winds blew from the north, Cao Cao's army was camped on the northern bank at Wulin, while the Sun-Liu coalition was on the southern bank at Chibi. If they used fire, the flames could easily turn back and burn themselves instead. That is why Luo Guanzhong invented the episode of Zhuge Liang borrowing the east wind. In reality, however, according to meteorological data from later generations, in this region during winter, there are usually 3 to 5 days when southeast winds occur. Therefore, it was not Zhuge Liang using sorcery to borrow the wind, but Zhou relying on his knowledge of local climate, patiently waiting for the southeast wind to rise. According to the records in Records of the Three Kingdoms, the actual development of the fire attack at Chibi was roughly as follows. Before the battle, Huang Gai had sharply realized that Cao Cao's deployment of troops on the water was unsound, and that he had foolishly allowed his warships to be tied together one after another in a row. It was precisely this flaw that Huang Gai seized upon, and Huang Gai presented to Zhou the stratagem of the ruse of injury. Zhou, after careful consideration, deemed the plan feasible and accepted Huang Gai's proposal. Huang Gai then personally carried it out, leading warships loaded with flammable materials, feigning surrender and sailing straight towards Cao Cao's fleet. Once the ships drew near, Huang Gai decisively ordered the fire to be set. In an instant, the flames roared violently, spreading rapidly, igniting not only the ships, but also the camps on the shore. The Jingzhou navy that Cao Cao had incorporated was almost entirely destroyed in the Sea of Fire, their warships burned to ruins. Taking advantage of the blaze and the chaos among Cao's troops, Zhou and Liu Bei led the allied forces in a swift landing, launching a fierce pursuit against Cao Cao's infantry. Amidst the turmoil, Cao's foot soldiers could not withstand the assault of the allied forces and were nearly wiped out. But is it possible that Cao Cao's ships were burned by his own hand? It may sound groundless, yet in the records there are 3 separate mentions suggesting that Cao Cao may have burned his own fleet. In the Jiangbiaozhuan, it is written that Cao Cao again sent a letter to Sun Quan, in which he stated, "The affair of Chibi was only due to illness. Therefore I burned the ships and retreated myself, allowing Zhou to unjustly claim the fame of victory." This meant that during the Battle of Chibi, disease spread through the army, and by burning the ships he voluntarily withdrew, leaving Zhou to seize undeserved glory. In the biography of Guo Jia, it is also recorded that As the Grand Army retreated north, at Baku an epidemic broke out, forcing them to burn their ships. In the biography of Sun Quan Pei, Songji wrote, Cheng Pu served as left and right commander, each leading 10,000 soldiers, advancing with Liu Bei, intending at Chibi to greatly defeat Cao Cao's forces, setting fire to the warships. With epidemic spreading silently, many died, and pursued by Cheng Pu to Nan Commandery, Cao Cao then returned north. Readers may notice that all three accounts, aside from mentioning Cao Cao burning his own ships, emphasize one crucial factor: epidemic disease. From the perspective of later generations examining the history of epidemics in China, the late Han and Three Kingdoms period was precisely the first great outbreak in Chinese history. From the second year of Jianning under Emperor Ling to the 25th year of Jianan under Emperor Xian, within roughly 50 years, history recorded as many as 13 major epidemics. The rise of the Taiping Dao was largely due to their banner of healing epidemic illness. Moreover, the Central Plains region under Cao Cao's control was exactly where epidemics raged most fiercely. During the Jianan era, aside from Cao Cao and his son, 4 others died or were suspected to have died of epidemic disease. According to historical sources, the link between Cao Cao's burning of ships and epidemic disease is highly probable. So then, who truly set the fire at Chibi? In reality, there may well have been 2 separate fires in the Battle of Chibi. The first blaze was set by the Sun-Liu alliance, the famous burning of Chibi, when Zhou Yu employed fire attack to incinerate a vast number of Cao Cao's warships, thereby securing victory on the river. Afterwards, the Sun-Liu coalition seized the chance to land and launch ground battle. As many northern troops were infected, their combat strength was gravely diminished, and they were ultimately defeated by the Sun-Liu alliance, leaving Cao Cao no choice but to retreat. The second blaze was kindled by Cao Cao himself. On the hurried retreat northward, Cao Cao feared that the ships would slow his march. Since most of those vessels had been taken from the Jingzhou Navy and could not be carried along, it was better to burn them than to abandon them. To prevent these spoils from falling into Sun and Liu's hands, he decided to torch the remaining ships. This action laid the groundwork for his later insistence that he had burned the ships himself to withdraw. In his letter to Sun Quan, Cao Cao mentioned that due to epidemic disease, he was compelled to burn the ships and retreat, seemingly shifting the blame for failure at Chibi to external causes. Much debate persists over whether Cao Cao was defeated by fire attack or by epidemic. Yet, whether by flames or disease, the root cause was that Cao Cao erred in both strategy and tactics. Strategically, as Jia Shu had said, Cao Cao's troops had long been at war, facing Wan Shao and the formidable Wu Huan, and were already exhausted. By the time they marched south to Jingzhou, their bow had lost its strength. But due to successive victories, Cao Cao became overly confident, launching this southern campaign recklessly. Tactically, Cao Cao lacked expertise in naval warfare, and his deployments contained flaws that allowed the fire attack to succeed. Cao Cao's helplessness had a demoralizing effect on his army. Moreover, he clearly did not understand the climate and terrain as well as Zhou Yu. Had he acted sooner and crossed the river first, the Sun-Liu alliance's tactics could never have been brought to bear. But instead, Cao Cao chose to confront Zhou Yu across the river, allowing Zhou Yu to seize the opportunity. Zhou Yu patiently waited for the right moment, while Cao Cao hesitated and delayed, missing his chance. Regarding the issue of epidemic disease, considering that during the late Eastern Han plagues often broke out, with Cao Cao's army campaigning far from home, the outbreak of disease was almost unavoidable. Zhou Yu had anticipated this possibility before the battle, but Cao Cao had no preparation to respond. Therefore, the devastation of Cao's army by epidemic was by no means mere misfortune, but a complete failure of planning. Many people believe that the Battle of Chibi was the decisive battle that laid the foundation for the tripartite division of the realm. But was this really the case? After Chibi, Cao Cao left Taoren to garrison the south, while he himself withdrew his army back to court. For Cao Cao, although defeated at Chibi, the the losses were not too severe. The navy and warships, which had not yet played their full role, were destroyed by fire, but this was not too great a regret. In this southern campaign, at the very least, Cao Cao had already achieved his strategic goal of eliminating Liu Biao. Moreover, after the campaign, he still controlled the three commanderies north of the Yangtze, and moving down into Jiangdong later would not be too late. Yet Zhou Yu shattered this illusion. He spent a whole year successfully repelling Taoren stationed troops and seizing Nan Commandery and Jiangxia. Meanwhile, despite Cao Cao's efforts, at most he could only hold on to Nanyang Commandery. After the Battle of Chibi, serious conflicts arose within Eastern Wu over how to deal with Liu Bei. Zhou Yu advocated striking quickly to eliminate Liu Bei while his foundation was not yet secure to remove future threats, but Lu Su held a different view. Valuing righteousness, he decided to temporarily hand over the military forces of Jingzhou to Liu Bei. This decision of Lu Su's had far-reaching influence on the development of Liu Bei's faction, enabling him to establish himself in the four southern commanderies of Jingzhou, then later advance westward, successfully seizing Shu territory and laying a firm foundation for the future state of Shu Han. From this perspective, the direct impact of the Battle of Chibi was not the formation of the tripartite division of the realm, but rather the tripartite division of Jingzhou. At that time, although the Sun Liu coalition dealt a crushing blow to Cao Cao, the overall situation of the country was still complex, with many forces holding territory independently. Even though Cao Cao was gravely weakened in position, his strength remained, and he could at any time march south again. The situation was still far from reaching the stage of a stable threefold division of the realm. What truly pushed forward the tripartite confrontation was the fierce struggle among Cao, Liu, and Sun for control of Jingzhou after the Battle of Chibi. In this strategic balance, the forces that fought at Chibi coincided with the three main powers of the Three Kingdoms era: Cao Cao, Sun Quan, and Liu Bei. In this battle, the Sun Liu coalition together resisted Cao Cao's southern advance and ultimately defeated him, laying the groundwork for the tripartite confrontation. Within the camps of Sun Quan and Liu Bei, three famous figures were most praised: Zhou Yu, Lu Su, and Zhuge Liang. Today, from the perspective of official history, let us consider which of these three was the true MVP of the Battle of Chibi. In the year 208, the 13th year of Jianan of the Eastern Han, was precisely the critical moment when the key events of the Battle of Chibi unfolded. In this year, Cao Cao carried out a series of major actions signaling the coming of the Great War. In 208, at Ye in the north, Cao Cao undertook large-scale construction, digging a massive lake named Xuanwu Pool, used to train the navy. Everyone knew well that Cao Cao's goal was to march south, conquer the south, and carry out his plan to unify the realm. Also in that year, in the 6th month, Cao Cao was appointed Chancellor of the Han, gaining even greater power. Just 1 month later, he immediately decided to launch a great campaign against Liu Biao in Jingzhou. Yet before his army could even arrive, bad news came. Liu Biao had died. His younger son Liu Kong succeeded him. At that time, Liu Bei was stationed at Fancheng. Unexpectedly, only 1 month after his father's death, Liu Kong chose to surrender to Cao Cao. This decision caught Liu Bei completely off guard, forcing him to hastily retreat. In Pei Xiongzi's annotations to the biography of the former lord, it was mentioned that Liu Kong's plan to surrender was never discussed with Liu Bei. Thus, when Liu Bei heard the news, his heart must have been filled with grief and resentment, as if stabbed in the back. He could only hurriedly gather his belongings and withdraw his troops southward. As Liu Bei's forces passed Xiangyang, Zhuge Liang advised his lord that since the Liu clan had already sold off their household, and he, being a member of the imperial Liu family, had more legitimate claim than Cao Cao, he should attack Xiangyang. But Liu Bei refused this proposal. As for the inner emotions of Liu Bei at that moment, we will not discuss for now. It is only known that he stood outside the city of Xiangyang, calling earnestly to Liu Kong, "Come here, Your uncle Suanda has words to say." But Liu Kong, perhaps out of shame, upon hearing Liu Bei's voice, was so frightened that he dared not show his face. On the other hand, when Cao Cao learned that Liu Kong had surrendered, he was overjoyed, for this victory came far more quickly than he had anticipated. It must be noted that Cao Cao's southern expedition this time had been undertaken under the banner of punishing Liu Biao. With the mission accomplished, reorganizing and consolidating local affairs in Jingzhou became his foremost priority. Some may ask, did Cao Cao not also send troops to pursue Liu Bei? From Liu Bei's perspective, Liu Kong's surrender indeed posed an existential crisis, forcing him to react swiftly. But for Cao Cao, it was merely a minor nuisance in the broader process of stabilizing Jingzhou. Liu Bei and his wandering troops were not a major threat. The main reason Cao Cao dispatched elite cavalry to pursue Liu Bei was out of concern that supplies in Jiangling might be seized by Liu Bei, thus creating further complications. Nevertheless, the greater part of Cao Cao's attention and resources were devoted to subduing the local powers in Jingzhou who had not yet submitted, with the hope of gradually bringing them all under his control. Precisely because Cao Cao did not fully commit to pursuing Liu Bei was able to preserve a path to survival. Liu Bei did not continue toward Jiangling, but resolutely turned to Jiaku, where he temporarily took refuge. At the same time, he dispatched Zhuge Liang to Chaisang to negotiate with Sun Quan, pushing forward the Sun Liu military alliance. The Sun Liu coalition was formally established. At this moment, the invincible navy of Eastern Wu was prepared, with Zhou Yu, Cheng Pu, Huang Gai, and others commanding the fleet as it advanced upstream on the Yangtze River. Meanwhile, Liu Bei awaited them at Fanku for their forces to join. Thus, the three powers of Cao Cao, Sun Quan, and Liu Bei all converged upon the historical stage of Chibi. As for the specific course of the Battle of Chibi, we will discuss this later in the analysis of individuals. Here, we only give a brief outline. The battle lasted about 2 months, not an especially long campaign. Compared with Guandu or Yiling, Chibi differed in one distinct aspect. It was more of a direct encounter than a war of total annihilation. Cao Cao's forces were far inferior to the Sun Liu alliance in naval warfare, and coupled with the outbreak of epidemic disease within his ranks, the situation grew increasingly unfavorable. Zhou Yu's subordinate Huang Gai suggested taking advantage of the wind to launch a fire attack, a strategy that ultimately brought about Cao Cao's disastrous defeat. Cao Cao retreated from Chibi to Wulin and finally withdrew to Nan Commandery in Jingzhou. Zhou Yu and Liu Bei pursued him relentlessly. In this battle, 3 prominent figures stand out as candidates for the title of meritorious contributors: Zhuge Liang, Lu Su, and Zhou Yu. We will analyze their outstanding roles at Chibi in depth, while also relying on the records of the 3 kingdoms to evaluate their achievement. It must be noted that since the records of the 3 kingdoms employed the biographical style, the accounts of the Battle of Chibi are scattered across several biographies. Aside from the biographies of these 3 candidates, both the Annals of Emperor Wu for Cao Cao and the biography of the former lord for Liu Bei also contain records of this battle. Let us first examine candidate number 1, Zhuge Liang, and what he accomplished at Chibi. In his biography, it is written that Liu Bei retreated south from Fancheng, and after passing Xiangyang turned east toward Xiaku. At that time, the situation was extremely urgent. Although Jiangxia was garrisoned by Liu Biao's eldest son Liu Qi, his forces were meager and the circumstances dire. Zhuge Liang, perceiving this clearly, requested to go to Shaisang, the naval base of Sun Quan, in hopes of securing reinforcements from Eastern Wu. This initial experience of Zhuge Liang in Eastern Wu was dramatized in the Romance of the 3 Kingdoms into the famous episode of The Debate with the Scholars, filled with theatrical tension. In reality, Zhuge Liang's principal counterpart was Sun Quan himself. When meeting Sun Quan, he lavished praise on his own lord Liu Bei, extolling him as wise and martial, while subtly mocking Sun Quan for lacking the courage to dispatch troops. A series of eloquent arguments and clever strategies displayed his brilliance in persuasion, leading some to call him the best salesman of the Three Kingdoms era without exaggeration. The diplomacy and persuasive power Zhuge Liang exhibited during this process directly secured the Sun-Liu alliance, laying the foundation for victory at Chibi. From the records of the Three Kingdoms, we can see that Zhuge Liang's primary contribution in the Battle of Chibi was not the legendary borrowing of the east wind, but rather his success in obtaining reinforcements from Sun Quan. The histories clearly record that after receiving encouragement and renewed confidence from Zhuge Liang, Sun Quan gladly dispatched 30,000 sailors to aid Liu Bei. Yet some may question whether Sun Quan had already intended to send troops beforehand. For if there had been no prior preparations, how could the army have happened to assemble at Chaisang, ready to march the moment Zhuge Liang arrived? This coincidence seems almost too convenient. In truth, if we carefully analyze the next key figure, this doubt may become clearer. Incidentally, let us also recall that the above discussion has mainly concerned the prelude to the battle. Thus, when Cao Cao was disastrously defeated at sea and began his retreat, we must ask, did Liu Bei's forces play a decisive role in the ground battle? To be honest, judging from the official records of Shu Han, the likelihood of this was relatively low. At that time, Liu Bei's main generals were none other than Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, yet in their recorded achievements, there is no detailed account of any contributions in the land battles of the Battle of Chibi. In the biography of the former lord, it is only mentioned in a few brief lines, with no specific merits attributed. This shows that throughout the entire course of the Battle of Chibi, the role of Liu Bei's side in land warfare was likely not as prominent as we imagine. Next, we must discuss the second MVP candidate, Lu Su. Was his contribution greater than that of Zhuge Liang? Lu Su styled Zijing like Zhuge Liang played the primary role of diplomacy during the Battle of Chibi. It can even be said that in terms of planning the grand strategy, he held an extremely important role. But compared with Zhuge Liang, Lu Su's achievements were recorded more clearly and directly in the historical sources. After the death of Liu Biao, Liu Bei was still hesitant, uncertain whether Lu Kong would surrender to Cao Cao. At that moment, Lu Su quickly made his judgment and reported to his lord Sun Quan. He analyzed that since Liu Biao had just passed away, his two sons were at odds, and the generals under his command all had their own opinions. Liu Bei was in a very difficult position. We should seize this opportunity while attending Liu Biao's funeral to find a way to draw Liu Bei over and form an alliance against Cao Cao. If we act too slowly, Cao Cao will very likely seize the initiative. Sun Quan accepted Lu Su's proposal and immediately dispatched him to carry out the mission. This was entirely a process of Lu Su racing against time, striving to secure a crucial strategic advantage. Although Liu Kong soon surrendered to Cao Cao, Lu Su still braved the danger, rushing day and night, and finally reached Changban in Dangyang to assist Liu Bei. When the two sides met, Liu Bei was isolated and driven into desperate straits. Upon learning that Sun Quan was willing to cooperate, Liu Bei was overjoyed, immediately sending Zhuge Liang as envoy to Eastern Wu to express sincerity and advance the alliance. It should be noted that in Sanguoji, in Zhuge Liang's biography, there is no mention of Lu Su first making contact with Liu Bei, and then Zhuge Liang later going to meet Sun Quan. This omission has led some historians to speculate that when Chen Shou compiled the individual biographies, he may have deliberately attributed the diplomatic credit to Zhuge Liang. Pei Songzi also expressed similar doubts, suggesting that in promoting the Sun-Liu alliance, the diplomatic contribution of Lu Su cannot be overlooked. Many people agree with this view, believing that in the diplomatic strategies before the Battle of Chibi, Lu Su was the true driving force, and that his contribution may even have surpassed Zhuge Liang. Having considered these two figures, we now turn to the third MVP candidate, Zhou Yu, styled Gong Jin. Among all the achievements related to the Battle of Chibi, Zhou Yu's career is the most detailed in the records, and his central importance is beyond question. Before the battle, Zhou Yu was firmly in favor of war. He sharply identified the weaknesses of Cao Cao's army and put forward specific strategic suggestions. For example, he pointed out that Cao's troops were unaccustomed to the water and climate, and at the same time the north was threatened by Ma Chao and external troubles, placing pressure on Cao Cao's rear. This series of analyses demonstrated Zhou Yu's profound strategic vision. Zhou Yu not only proposed plans but also personally requested to lead, taking 30,000 elite troops to station at Xiaku, showing great initiative and resolve. Later, when Sun Quan and Liu Bei reached an agreement to ally, Zhou Yu was given command, leading the army to confront Cao Cao at Chibi. According to San Guozhi, in Zhou Yu's biography, at the start of the battle, Cao's troops, being unaccustomed to the water and climate, were stricken by epidemic disease, putting them at a disadvantage and forcing them to withdraw to camp on the northern bank of the Yangtze. At this point, his subordinate Huang Gai put forward the famous suggestion of fire attack. He said that since the enemy was massed together, which was unfavorable for a prolonged struggle, and that he had observed Cao Cao's ships linked together bow to stern in a long line, why not try using fire? Zhou Yu adopted Huang Gai's proposal, then orchestrated Huang Gai's feigned surrender in coordination with the fire attack, and in the end burned Cao Cao's navy. This tactic successfully dealt a heavy blow to Cao's forces, becoming the most crucial turning point of the Battle of Chibi. The records of this fire attack are found in San Guozhi in the biographies of Huang Gai, Cheng Pu, and other related accounts, all corresponding with one another without contradiction. This further shows that Zhou Yu held the central role in this battle. From these historical sources, it can be seen that Zhou Yu not only devised detailed strategic plans, but also displayed outstanding command ability in execution. Compared with the two previous candidates, Zhou Yu's contributions were more direct and decisive, securing for him a vital place in the Battle of Chibi. Chen Shou, the author of San Guozhi, had a principle in compiling history. If an event involved many participants, the process would be recorded in the biography of the principal participant. Thus, regarding the Battle of Chibi, the one whose deeds were recorded most thoroughly was, without doubt, Zhou Yu. I also believe that the one most deserving of the MVP title for defeating Cao Cao at Chibi must be Zhou Yu. However, there are three issues most worthy of reflection. First, when Chen Shou wrote the records of the three kingdoms, was he influenced by the political realities of his own time? The answer is evident. Chen Shou served as an official under the Western Jin, and when compiling history he had to carefully consider the respect due to the Jin dynasty and its predecessor regime, Cao Wei. Such respect was a crucial condition in the process of writing. If his work outwardly lacked sufficient reverence for these two regimes, Chen Shou might have faced reproach from the people or even risked his own life. But what of his true inner feelings? Everyone knows Chen Shou was originally from Shu, and his own teacher in learning was Cao Zhou, a high minister under the later lord Adu. Thus, Chen Shou always retained a nostalgic sentiment for the Shu Han regime. From his frequent praise of Zhuge Liang and Liu Bei in many passages, this inclination can be discerned. The contradictory records we previously discussed, in fact, arose from this difficult position. Because the Battle of Chibi carried such weight and involved all three powers of Wei, Shu, and Wu, the complexity of the context inevitably affected Chen Shou's writing. At this point arises the second question. If Zhou Yu was truly the one who defeated Cao Cao, then why in the annals of Emperor Wu is it written that Liu Bei defeated Cao Cao? To call Zhou Yu the one who defeated Cao Cao would not have harmed Cao Cao's reputation in any substantive way. In reality, Cao Cao's primary target before Chibi was to march south against Liu Biao, but Liu Biao died early and Cao Cao never directly fought him. His son Liu Kong quickly surrendered and Cao Cao at once took possession of Jingzhou. From the historical evidence, it is clear that the foremost mission of Cao Cao's forces at the time was to swiftly integrate the local powers of Jingzhou. The pursuit of Liu Bei was only to prevent him from seizing the supplies stored in Jiangling, which would have complicated future campaigns. After reorganizing Jingzhou, Cao Cao intended to focus his strength against Liu Bei. But unexpectedly, Liu Bei had already allied with Sun Quan, and Sun Quan had appointed Zhou as his commander. Thus many understood that while Cao Cao initially aimed to pursue Liu Bei, midway unforeseen events led to his defeat. As for why the records did not clearly state the role of the Sun-Lu alliance, that was tied to the dispute over Jingzhou after Chibi and the complexities of diplomacy at the time. Taking a step further, if one truly argues that Liu Bei defeated Cao Cao, then the account of Chen Shou in the biography of Zhou Yu must be deemed fabricated. Yet in such a pivotal battle involving all three sides, if Chen Shou had falsified events, it could hardly have passed the rigorous scrutiny of later historians. The third issue concerns how we ought to evaluate Chen Shou's account of the Battle of Chibi. Later scholars often praised him as a talent for reliable history. From Cao Zhou, Chen Shou learned a key principle of writing history amid chaos: safeguard oneself while leaving behind clues. When writing, Chen Shou adopted a cautious approach, ensuring conformity with the political realities of his day while striving to preserve genuine traces for posterity. This method allowed the records of the three kingdoms, despite the changes of dynasties, to remain a precious source for later histories. As time passed, topics once sensitive gradually lost their restrictions, enabling subsequent works such as the Book of the Later Han and the Later Han records to rely on Chen Shou's accounts and, by unwritten rule, record the truth explicitly. At Chibi, it was Zhou Yu who defeated Cao Cao. The Battle of Chibi was a decisive engagement in the history of the three kingdoms, involving the three great powers of Cao Cao, Sun Quan, and Liu Bei. This victory laid the foundation for the tripod balance of forces. Among the key figures, Zhuge Liang, Lu Su, and Zhou Yu all made outstanding contributions. Zhuge Liang, through his mission to Eastern Wu, forged the Sun-Lu alliance and laid the groundwork for the campaign. Lu Su, perceiving the situation during the crisis, persuaded Sun Quan to cooperate with Liu Bei against Cao Cao, providing essential strategic support. And Zhou Yu, with his strategic vision and masterful use of fire attack, directly defeated Cao Cao's navy and played the decisive role. In the overall view, Zhou Yu's performance at Chibi was the most prominent. His military talent and tactical decisions are regarded as the crucial factors that secured victory.